Hey everyone, this is Kenji. I'm at my restaurant Wursthall, and today Sous Chef Erik is going to show us how to make our Bratwurst.
The first step is to trim the meat. I have some beautiful meat here. This is some meat that is from the leg. It's kind of boned out leg, as well as some picnic shoulder that's kind of from the shoulder area. And it's got, you can see, a good amount of fat and some good fat here, but not quite enough. That's why I have back fat right here. So this back fat is going to give us enough fat to make the sausage juicy and delicious in the way that we need. The more fat, to a certain extent, the better. You're looking for about 20 to 35% fat.
So if people are making this at home, can they use just something like pork shoulder that they buy at the supermarket?
Yes, absolutely. And in fact, that's what I would recommend doing, is going to a good butcher. I go to Fatted Calf here in the Bay Area, and they can give you pork shoulder that has the fat cap on it. That's what you want to ask
And then
for.
you wouldn't necessarily need the extra pork fat.
Exactly, exactly. What we do at the restaurant is actually we make sausage out of pork shoulder mainly, and then some pork belly or back fat, just to provide the right ratio. And you don't have to worry too much about getting exactly 20% fat, because there's fat, kind of intramuscular fat going on anyway. But it's good to eyeball it. And we are making bratwurst. This is exactly the recipe we use at the restaurant. So what you are getting here, and Kenji, I assume we can post the recipe for people.
Yeah, we'll do that.
So you'll be able to make this at home, which is pretty cool.
It looks like the cuts you're using here right now don't have a ton of connective tissue.
No.
If there is a lot of, pork shoulder will have a lot more connective tissue than that. How much of it do you need to trim out, and how carefully do you need to trim?
So for home grinders, I actually spend probably more time than most trimming out connective tissue, because I don't want people, biting into a sausage and getting like chewy connective tissue. That's not really pleasant, right? Yeah, you do have to spend some time. And here's some example of, kind of this sort of silvery skin you can take out.
And discard.
And discard, exactly.
And especially with a home grinder, if you're using like a KitchenAid attachment or a small manual grinder, that stuff is going to clog up the blades pretty fast.
Exactly. And so what I would recommend, I'm trimming the meat kind of small, even for our grinder. I actually prefer trimming meat on the small side, because it does help get the meat through the grinder. Industrial grinders can handle bigger pieces than these. If you're making sausage at home, I would recommend pieces pretty much about this size, maybe even a little smaller. And that's going to ensure that you get a good grind. The thing you want to do is ensure that you are keeping the meat cold throughout the process. That's going to help ensure a couple of things. One is, you don't want the fat to start melting, because that's going to ruin the texture of the sausage. I'm obsessive about that because it does make a difference in terms of the end result.
If you've ever had a sausage that kind of has a grainy texture to it, or that the fat runs out of, most likely that's because it got too warm while it was being made.
Yes.
Or it could be a salt issue.
Yeah, it could be a salt issue. It's like broken sausage, and that's the effect of that overheating. And the term for that, when it comes out of the grinder when it's too hot, is smear, and you do not want smear at all. So you can see I'm getting rid of some of this connective tissue. You might want to get in here. And I'm not being ultra careful, I'm kind of working hastily. But you can see kind of the striations here, there's some connective tissue. Okay.
So that white kind of leathery looking stuff is what you're trying to get out.
Exactly, exactly. Okay, so let me take some of this fat. Again, you can use pork belly, is a little easier to find at the supermarket than back fat.
If someone can find something, I know it's relatively easy to find like a either salted pork belly, salt pork, or salted fat back. If someone can only find salted but not fresh, is there anything they can do with that?
Yes. So what you can do is, when you're measuring out the salt for the sausage, you set aside all that salted meat that you bought, all right? You salt the meat that is not salted, and then you mix it in.
Right. And
you know,
you assume that all salted meat is already salted at the level you want
at
it.
a certain level. Now, you have less control over the salt that way, of course, but that's a good alternative if that's all you can find. And actually, salted bacon and sausages actually can be quite delicious, right?
Yeah.
So that is something that you can do. So what I'm going to do now is measure out the meat that I have. So I have 3,728 grams of meat here, all right? And so now that I have the meat trimmed, I'm going to measure out and mix in the salt. So I use 2% salt, and you can use anything between 1.8% and like 2.2% salt is like a pretty typical range. We find that that works really well for us. 2% works perfectly for us. So 3,728 times 0.02 equals 74.5 grams, roughly, okay? So I'm gonna measure that out. Hopefully not lose my sodium nitrite.
If you did want to make like a lower sodium sausage, what would the minimum amount of salt you need be?
The minimum, good question. The minimum would be I'd say 1.6% is probably on the low end.
And any lower than that, and the sausage just won't bind properly.
It won't bind properly, and it won't, you know, it won't have as long kind of refrigerator life. It's just not it's not going to behave like sausage or really taste like sausage.
And that's because salt, when it comes into contact with meat, quick here. Salt, when it comes into contact with meat, it actually breaks down the protein a little bit, and so you need that salt in there to allow the proteins to bind and form this sort of matrix that holds in moisture. So it's what gives the sausage a springiness, as well as what helps the sausage retain moisture. So salt is not just about saltiness when it comes to sausages or most kinds of charcuterie.
All right, and so right now I'm measuring way too much of this. So I'm measuring in the sodium nitrite, and that's 0.025%. So I multiplied the total of the trimmed meat by 0.0025. And so we came out
with that around here,
like
around 90?
9, exactly.
9?
Yeah. Now, what I do is mix it really well. So we'll mix this sausage, let me move all this stuff out of the way, with impeccably clean hands, of course, Kenji, right? And so I'm going to mix it around, and I'm going to cure this. So I'm going to put this in the refrigerator overnight, and for up to 2 or even 3 days for bratwurst.
And those benefits would be sort of a tighter texture,
yes,
better moisture retention.
Exactly. So what I'm going to do next, and this won't be on camera, but you'll see when we take it out of the fridge, is I'm going to put some saran wrap directly over the surface just to avoid any oxidation. You don't have to do that. You could just cover this and then put it in the refrigerator. But that's what I'm going to do. I'm packing it down so there's as little air as possible in in the meat area, and then we'll see you again in a day or so, right?
Yeah. Okay.
All right.
So we'll do a little magic swipe here, and here we are again.
Hello, everyone.
It's been what, a day?
Yes. Had a good night's sleep. I'm feeling refreshed. I'm ready to go.
All right.
All right.
You
so
didn't just change your shirt.
Yeah, I did not. I swear. Okay. So let's take a look at the meats. As I mentioned, I put some saran wrap over the top of the meat, directly over. And it's looking good.
And the other thing people might notice is that the color will have changed a bit. So rather than being sort of the fresh pink color of the fresh meat, it's going to be more of a darker color.
Exactly.
That's because of the way the salt is interacting with the meat.
Yes. So for bratwurst, typically it's ground very fine and or emulsified, right? I don't recommend doing that at home. We don't even do that at the restaurant because you really need to control temperature very carefully, and that's difficult to do even with equipment like this. So I would recommend when you do grind at home, use a larger die to start out. If you want to regrind and make sure that it's a little finer, grind once, spread out the meat on a tray, freeze it again, and then grind it through a smaller die at that point. Okay. Now we're using a big old grinder here, but you can actually use, I think Kenji, you've used like a hand crank grinder before, right?
Yes. I use a hand crank grinder at home, and actually, I'll put a link to it, but I actually find that at home, a plastic grinder actually works better because with a big heavy grinder like this, you can put all the metal parts into a freezer, or you can work directly while you're in the walk-in or in a cool room, and that'll help keep the meat cold. But at home, the grinders are usually so small that with a metal grinder, they pick up ambient, they come to ambient temperature really fast. So you actually get more benefit out of using a plastic grinder that will keep your meat insulated a little bit better and doesn't start to heat up as you grind.
Okay. Now all I need to do is find the power switch. This is going to get loud. You ready?
Mm-hmm.
All right. So pretty coarse grind, as you can see. If we were making this bratwurst for the restaurant, we'd grind partially through this die and then partially through the smaller of the two dies that I showed you. Okay? And you'll notice I don't even have like a sausage kind of stuffing thing. What you don't want to do is like shove the meat into the grinder assembly and heat everything up, make it difficult to grind through. You want everything to kind of easily make its way through the gears.
If you do have to kind of force it through, it means that there's probably some smearing going on, or maybe there's some kind of sinew stuck in there. And rather than forcing it through, you want to disassemble it, clean out the blade.
And you can see like the meat, even at the end, it's coming out pretty easily. There's no like bunching up that you would see. If you saw this kind of bunching up right up here and not falling, that would be a problem. Even at the end, this is looking just fine. And you can see here, you have individual pieces of meat and fat. Again, what you want, right? And that's it.
When it bunches up like that, what's going on is that the meat is getting kind of bound up in the cutting blade and not going straight through the die and not getting chopped. And so what happens is, rather than going through the holes, it ends up kind of like squeezing out the sides of the die. And so if you see it like squeezing out the sides like that, or it looks like a paste rather than individual little chunks of meat, that's when you should take it apart, clean, and keep going.
Precisely. We missed a chunk. Leave no chunk behind. So I'm going to throw this in here and grind a little more. Plus, I love this sound, don't you? Isn't that very nice? Now, I have a home grinder that's about a third this size and is 10 times as loud. It's really loud. Home grinders can get very loud. Okay, so here we go. Everything is ready to go here. And the meat looks beautiful. You can see it was a little darker before we ground it, but it's beautifully pink here and cured. I did not mention, I think, yesterday that the quality of the meat is going to make its way through the sausage, right? So when you are looking for meat, the higher quality, the better. One way to tell a very good piece of pork from other, like pork that you might not want to use, is the color of the fat. And so this is beautifully white. The color of the meat itself is pinkish. That's what you want. You don't want like some gray, kind of sad looking pork.
And some types of like heirloom pigs might even have a reddish meat to them.
Yes, yeah, and that's a great sign actually. So, okay, so we are going to mix in our seasonings now. Most people who make sausage would have mixed the seasonings in with the chunks of meat before grinding. I do not, for a couple of reasons. One is, if I'm making sausage at home or even at the restaurant, I might make more than one kind at a time. So what's the point of, grinding a bunch of meat like one batch at a time, having to clean the grinder in between batches? Doesn't make sense. The other thing is, I think there's a little more control over seasoning when you grind first with just salted meat than if you put in the seasonings beforehand. You're kind of overcommitting otherwise. And then finally, I don't want anything to interfere with the grind itself. So anything that could gum up the grinder, I don't want to even mess with. That's why I grind just with the salted meat before adding seasonings. Okay.
Right.
All right. So speaking of which, going. Look at this display. This is nice. All right. So for bratwurst, this is our bratwurst recipe is traditional as far as bratwurst go. Pretty traditional. We got some dry marjoram. You can use fresh marjoram. That's perfectly fine.
And are you talking traditional German or traditional Wisconsin?
Traditional, as far as I know, kind of German. Now, I am no food historian, so Kenji, you might actually know better where this hews in terms of tradition.
Well, you know what I find is that in Germany, bratwurst typically is an emulsified sausage.
Yes.
Whereas in the U.S. it tends to be a coarser
yes,
sausage. Yeah.
Yes.
So
in terms of seasonings, though,
in terms of seasoning, though, I think ours is a little more along the lines of German sausage as opposed to German American.
Exactly. So we have marjoram. I've got nutmeg here. Everything here is ground very fine. I even ground some of the marjoram to break it up a little bit, and that varies depending on the sausage you're using, right? I measured this all out after knowing how much meat I had and how much seasoning.
So marjoram, nutmeg, white pepper, and
yes, marjoram, nutmeg, white pepper, garlic powder, and powdered ginger.
Got it. And we'll put the exact recipe again down in the description.
Exactly. Yes. And now we can add a couple of other things. So bratwurst has eggs in it typically. So I'm going to add 3 eggs. And again, we will post this. I think the recipe we post will probably end up being by the kilogram, so that you can scale it up easily. Okay, so we've got that. And you know, because this is not a light sausage, we've got heavy cream here. I'm gonna add some heavy cream. And everything here is still very cold, right? So we use a light beer. We use Helles beer. Any sort of Pilsner will work also.
This is Andex, which is, I believe, the oldest continuously operating brewery in the world.
I did not know that.
I think so.
Okay.
My partner Adam would know better, but I'm pretty sure.
Yeah. All right. So we've got some beer. We'll measure it out. Cheers. All right. In terms of liquid in sausage for pork, at the restaurant we incorporate 10% liquid. So that may seem like a lot, but sausage needs to be juicy and delicious, right? And so it's important to add some form of liquid. In this case, we're using cream and beer. You can, of course, just use water. All right. So we've got everything in here, and now I'm going to mix this. It's important to mix the sausage really thoroughly. Now we have a mixer that can mix up to 50 pounds of sausage at a time, so we don't mix by hand usually. But
Can I ask you a question?
Yes.
Is this some kind of a farce to you?
No, this is no joke. I'd like to link one pun to another, but can't really do that very easily. Okay, so my hand is very cold. This is cold, but you know what? For the sake of the right texture, that's what it takes. It takes having cold hands. All right.
If you're at home, you could also use something like a KitchenAid with a paddle attachment.
Yes.
To do this mixing for you.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And is there anything that you're specifically looking for as far as the mixture goes? Like, how do you know when it's done?
So there are a couple of ways of testing. You can see it's starting to get it looks a little more uniform, and you can see that the proteins are starting to bind together. That's a good sign.
So it's starting to get kind of tacky.
Yeah, tacky, exactly. And there are a couple of tests that you can make. One is you can take some of the sausage and then just kind of hold it. And if the sausage can stick to your to your hand, your impeccably clean or gloved hand for quite a while, then the texture should be close to ready.
And you'll also see as he's going, it's starting to kind of form a film around the edge around the sides of the bowl.
Yep.
So it doesn't just pull away cleanly from the bowl. So that's that tackiness that you're seeing here as well.
Yep, exactly. And it doesn't matter whether you're working with pork or beef or poultry, you want this kind of effect. All right, I think we're pretty much there, Kenji. What about you?
That looks right to me.
Yeah. All right. So
Okay, so are we ready to stuff now?
we are. I just
All right,
have
so
to
we'll
set
do
up
another
the
little magic wipe cut here.
All right. All right, ready to stuff.
Okay.
Now, you don't need a stuffer, of course. You can just make sausage patties, and that is delicious. If you try making sausage and you really like it, it's pretty easy to invest. I would recommend investing in a small sausage stuffer. They cost like $100 or something, so they're not cheap. So make sure you like, sausage making before you invest in one. But it does make a huge difference in terms of.
Right. So these if you buy like the KitchenAid attachment for a sausage thing, it has little attachment nozzles that allow you to stuff sausage. But the issue is that still uses the auger to push through the farce, push through the sausage mixture, which can heat it up.
Yep.
So a much better way to do it is with one of these, which is a piston stuffer, which just pushes the sausage through. So it doesn't actually heat it up as much, nearly as much, and it gives you a lot more force. Which makes it easier to do like a thicker or coarser sausage mixture. With with an auger style sausage stuffer, you're going to be really limited in the volume you can do and also the types of sausage you can do.
Yes, and it also introduces a lot of air using the auger. So this way, minimizes the air that you introduce in the sausage, and you end up with a better sausage in the end. You don't have to poke a bunch of holes in it, etc. So we have sausage stuffed in here, and as you can see, there's no air. There are no air pockets in here. I really pushed it in to the sausage stuffer, and this is not what we use at the restaurant unless it's for testing. So if I'm making a small test batch, I'll use this small stuffer. I think it's got a 5-pound capacity roughly, but it works really well for home use.
What's the capacity of the one we use downstairs?
The one we use is it's 30 pounds, so it's much larger. Industrial size. It has 2 gears. It's great as far as stuffers go. And now for the casing itself. So this is hog casing. It's intestine. It's kind of on the narrower side in terms of as far as hog casings go. We have one of these little easy thread tubes. Hopefully it's easy.
So if you buy hog casing, which you can get online or at like a sausage supply shop, a butcher shop, usually doesn't come with that casing, and you kind of have to manually feed it onto the sausage stuffer, which is a little bit of a pain in the butt.
It is. In fact, I don't need very much, so I'm just going to cut this real quick. Don't do this at home on metal. It's not a good idea. Okay. But all right. And in terms of getting the casing ready, so I rinsed this out in several changes of cold water, and then I ran the water, like cold tap water, through this little tube here, just to make sure that I get rid of as much salt as possible. These already show up clean, so you don't have to worry too much about that. But it's never a bad idea to make sure these are as desalinated as possible. Casing will last a long time because it's packed either in straight salt or it's packed in salinated water. Okay, so I think that's good for now in the interest of getting this going. So we've got the end of the casing here. I'm going to slowly turn the crank to try to get as much air out as possible. And so now the sausage is coming out. You don't have to tie the end of the link, but I find it helpful. All right.
You're trying to tie it with no air trapped in it.
Yes, And you know, it's not going to be perfect. You can see there's some air there. That's why we have this handy sausage pricker, as it's known. I actually prefer working with a sewing needle, with the back of the sewing needle stuck into an old cork. That's what I use at home. We just happen to have this, so that's what we're using now. And when you're stuffing, you control kind of how tight the stuffing is, kind of at the end of the stuffing tube. So right now I'm not doing much. I'm just kind of guiding the casing through.
So you would make a more tightly packed sausage by squeezing tighter and holding the casing back a little more.
Yes. Yes.
And a looser sausage by keeping your hand looser.
Yes. Exactly.
And the idea is that if you're going to be making this into links, you don't want the sausage to be extremely tight at the beginning, because you're going to lose, because as you start twisting the links, they're going to get tighter. So if you make it too tight at the beginning, and I've done this, you know, when I was, the first time I made sausage, I remember doing that and then twisting the links and then having half of them burst open, because suddenly the casing becomes much tighter when you start twisting them.
Exactly. There is a learning curve with this, and that's part of the fun of learning how to make sausages. Kind of figure out the methods and systems that work for you. Okay. And I keep things as neat as possible, just because then when I link the sausage, it makes it easier to link at the end. I tend to stuff on the tighter side for texture. You don't want like too much air in your sausage. All right, there we go. That's good. Okay. So we're pretty much at the end of the road here. So let's take a look here and see what we're looking at in terms of air bubbles. It actually looks pretty good, Kenji. So I'm looking for air bubbles certainly at the end of this. Yeah, I'm feeling pretty good about this. And I can always use this after I make links as well. Now, you may freak out because I'm actually piercing holes in the sausage. That's not going to affect the sausage in any way.
It'll affect a bad sausage, because in a bad sausage, the casing is what's holding the fat in, but in a well-made sausage, it's the structure of the sausage itself that's holding the fat in.
So do pierce my sausages. Okay, so let's take a look here. In terms of twisting links, there are a number of ways that you can do it. I think that the easiest way is what I'm going to demonstrate. Shall I move this over this way?
You're good.
Okay. All right. So the way that I learn how to twist links the first time is kind of how I still do it, where I find the length that I want, and I've got a good, got a good pinch on here. Okay, that's a terrible thing, right? Oh my gosh, what happened? Well, you know, this happens. It's not a huge deal. Maybe I stuffed it a little too tight. Maybe that casing is a little weak at that point. Hopefully this won't happen the next time I do. So I twisted this in one direction, right? Now I'm going to squeeze, kind of find the second link, but I'm not going to twist that link. Instead, I'm going to go to the third link and squeeze and twist that.
In the same direction again.
Same direction, yeah.
And that way what you end up with is that the sausages are alternating directions in which they are twisted.
Yep.
So, oh, there's another little hole.
There's another one. So, you know, I think in this case I might have been too aggressive with the twisting. But it's okay. The way to fix that on this side is actually to make a really small little, you know, dud link and then twist again. I'm going to twist a little less here. This casing is not behaving so well, and part of that is not my fault, actually. It's the casing. Sometimes we get them in huge buckets, and sometimes they're really sturdy and sometimes they're not. That's part of kind of working with a natural product. All right.
This is not performance anxiety here.
No. Big money, big money. This is how not to twist sausage, I guess. So I'm actually, let's see. Okay. Whoa, again. Wow, Kenji, we have faulty casing. What are we gonna do? Maybe we can twist some more. I don't know.
I think it's. I mean, I think you know, this is a.
Yeah.
On this show, we show all the mistakes, so it's fine. Like I think
that's right.
This is probably going to happen to you. As I mean, this is like when I make sausage at home. This happens to me occasionally.
Yep.
So it's not something you really have to worry about. It's going to happen to you. If you make sausage, it's going to happen to you eventually.
Yep. Exactly. And it's happening to me on this YouTube channel, so it's fantastic. All right, so let me twist some more. All right, so we're doing better now. And of course, we can go faster. I'm being ultra careful at this point. Okay, so yeah, so see, I just pinched it and it broke. So we have casing that's very difficult to work with. And I'll just do my best here. And if this were happening at the restaurant, we would stop and then we would take it out and redo it
in a brand new casing.
Yeah, and we would use brand new casing. It does happen. It doesn't happen very often, so I guess I'm lucky. But it does happen. Okay, there we go. All right. So here's our beautiful sausage. So we've got a coil of sausage. Hopefully, I bet the first time you do this, it will look better than this. So you have something to look forward to because in this case we had a lot of blowouts. But again, this will be delicious. If you want, if you have more casing, you can take this out of the casing, restuff it, and in fact, I have more meat that I'll stuff later.
And once you're done with this, what's the best way to store it?
So the best way to store it is actually, so now it's a nice, neat coil. I would uncoil it on a sheet pan like this. Okay, and if you have room in your refrigerator, this is a full size, you probably don't in your refrigerator, but like a half-size sheet pan or something like that. Put it in your refrigerator, open, uncovered for a while. And that's going to help the casing dry out enough so that when you cut the links, they won't unravel. And plus they kind of cure a little more in the refrigerator that way. So it works out well. When you do cut the links, I can demonstrate that quickly. What you want to do is kind of pull them apart a little bit. So you see where that little twist is? So you pull it apart and then you cut like right in the middle. And that should ensure that you're not cutting into the sausage. So that's about it.
All right. And so when it comes to cooking these, I'll link to the video I've already done that shows you how you can cook these at home. And you know what, maybe when we shut off this camera later today, I can show you how we cook them at the restaurant also.
Yeah, sounds good.
All right. All right. Thanks, Eric.
Okay, thank you. Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye.